Although they are often overlooked amongst other artists of the rock and roll era in the 1960s, the Beach Boys have built the most impressive catalog of music and accomplishments that is unmatched in the United States and possibly anywhere in the world with the exception of the Beatles. Beach Boys were formed in 1962 in Hawthorne, California, with the three Wilson brothers, Brian, Carl, and Dennis, cousin Mike Love, and family friend Al Jardine. They recorded their first song, Surfin', for the Small Candix label in Los Angeles. When the song reached number 75 on the national charts and made the top 10 on the local charts, Capitol Records took notice and signed the group to a recording contract. Over the next 2 years, the group would record 7 albums. 6 of them would go gold and 1 of them would go platinum, and they'd have 12 top 20 singles. At the time, their music consisted mostly of surf and hot rod music, and they were one of the first bands to record what's called a concept album. That would be the Little Deuce Coupe album. That album consisted of car songs and automotive-related songs. By 1964, Brian Wilson was reaching his peak as a producer and songwriter, and he made the decision to leave the road. He was first replaced by Glenn Campbell, and later on by Bruce Johnston, and Brian spent his time focusing on music in the studio. He began work on what was considered his masterpiece album. The album was called Pet Sounds. Rolling Stone magazine has called Pet Sounds the greatest album of all time, and none other than Paul McCartney referred to it as his favorite album and even said that the Beatles were inspired to record the Sgt. Pepper album after hearing Pet Sounds. Brian reached his full peak in 1966 when he released what he called a pocket symphony. This was one song that he spent 6 months recording, and that song was called Good Vibrations. The song quickly went to number 1 on the US charts and on charts around the world, and at the end of the year, the Beach Boys were voted the most popular band in the world, even ahead of the Beatles. But things were not always rosy in the Beach Boys land. Brian's drug use and behavior was becoming more erratic as he was working on what he called his masterpiece album, Smile. After 5 or 6 months working on the album, his behavior became even more erratic and the album was shelved. Things continued to get worse for the Beach Boys as they pulled out of the Monterey Pop Festival, which was a precursor to the Woodstock Music Festival. The record sales were beginning to fall even more, and they were having personal problems as well. One of the worst personal problems was Dennis Wilson and his association with Charles Manson and the Manson family. By the time 1969 rolled around, the record sales were in the tank, and they were finally dropped by the record label Capitol Records. As the 1970s dawned with a new record label, the band decided they needed to find a different route to go. They spent more time playing colleges and trying to connect with a college audience, and playing more prestigious gigs like the Fillmore with the Grateful Dead and Carnegie Hall. They released their 1971 album Surf's Up to critical acclaim, and they were back on their way up again. By 1973, Rolling Stone magazine referred to them as the Band of the Year, strictly on their live shows, having not had a studio album released in several years. But by 1974, their fortunes turned and they were back on the top of the charts. Capitol Records released the double LP Endless Summer, which was a collection of their greatest hits from the 1960s, and that album quickly rocketed to the top of the charts and stayed on the charts for a remarkable 75 weeks. By 1976, Brian was back with the band, and they recorded their first new album in 4 years, 15 big ones. The album gave them their first top 5 single in over 10 years, rock and roll music, and the band was once again playing the sold-out tours. As the 1980s rolled around, the band was becoming even more popular. In July of 1980, the band played before 500,000 people at the National Mall on July 4th. At this time, it is still considered the largest crowd for a rock concert for a single band. Unfortunately, things were getting worse again for the band. Brian's behavior was becoming more erratic, and in December 1983, drummer Dennis Wilson drowned at the age of 39. The band managed to stay together, but Brian continued to regress. By 1988, the band had a surprise #1 hit with the song Kokomo from the new movie soundtrack Cocktail, and once again they were playing to sold-out audiences and were #1 on the charts. Unfortunately, as the 90s rolled around, their fortunes began to slip again, and in 1998, Carl Wilson died of cancer at the age of 52. The band continued on after that as they splintered. Brian went off and played more solo shows, and Al Jardine continued to play shows on his own. But in 2012, the band reunited for their 50th anniversary and recorded a new album, That's Why God Made the Radio, which went to number 3 on the Billboard charts. After the tour was over, the band once again went their separate ways. Looking back over the course of the band's 50-plus year career, they've had 22 award-winning albums, they've had the most top 40 singles of any American band, they played before the largest crowd ever, and as of July of 2017, they played over 6,300 live shows. Like most great things in life, we don't realize the extent of that greatness until we examine the totality of what we are seeing. The Beach Boys have built a monument to greatness in popular music for over 50 years, and that greatness will continue to grow as long as people listen to popular music. And I'd like you to say hello to the audience. Say hello, audience. Thank you.